Okay, class, we're looking now at the internal ear. Okay, as you may recall, the ear is located within the temporal bone, the confines of the temporal bone. This is what I want you to imagine. We go into the temporal bone, we cut spaces out within the temporal bone, cut spaces without, and the spaces are like a maze or a labyrinth, but we have these spaces. Then what I'm going to do is take a little plastic tube and push it into those spaces of the temporal bone. One continuous plastic tube. Now, now what I have is a space between the bone and the outside of the plastic tube, and then a space inside the plastic tube. And this tube is in this maze, all in the temporal bone. Okay, imagine the spaces cut out in the bone are going to be called the bony labyrinth. Imagine that the plastic tube would be called the membranous labyrinth. Okay, a membrane within there, a tube-like membrane within there with several parts to it. Okay, now the space between the bone and the tube is going to be filled with some fluid, and that fluid is going to be called perilymph. Peri around, perilymph. That fluid has similar composition of cerebrospinal fluid. As a matter of fact, it is communicating with the cerebrospinal fluid. Then I'm going to put some fluid inside the plastic tube, i.e. inside the membranous labyrinth, and I'm going to call that endolymph. Endolymph. And the endolymph is very similar to intracellular fluid, which has a high potassium. Now, when the head vibrates and motion occurs and various things of that nature, that fluid moves, the perilymph does. And it's the movement of that fluid that can signal changes in body position and acceleration. That's the perilymph. Okay? So we have within this bone, this hollow space, we have several areas. One area is called the vestibule. That's the cutout area for one component of the inner ear. Another component of the inner ear is going to be a cutout portion for something called the semicircular canals. And then another portion is going to be for something called the cochlea. Okay, the cochlea. All right, and we'll be looking at that. Okay, here's a drawing to show the three regions I just mentioned: the cochlea, the vestibule, and the semicircular canals. Now, here's the oval window here, and this is where the middle ear bone, the stapes, would be pushing on. So what area do we get to first? We get to the vestibule. Now, remember what a vestibule is in everyday language. It's like a hallway, an entranceway that leads from the outside. So that's where this vestibule is. Now, the vestibule is the cutout portion of the bone, the cutout portion. But the membranous labyrinth, which would be inside, has two sac-like structures. One here is this one, the utricle, and the other is going to be the saccule. So in other words, we're looking at the utricle and the saccule. The utricle communicates here with these semicircular canals, and the saccule with the cochlea, as we'll speak of. Okay, so this is that particular portion. Okay, within Within the membranous area of the vestibule here, the membranous portion of it, utricle and saccule, you have the maculae that we'll look at, the maculae. Okay, class, here would be a depiction of the maculae within the vestibule areas. And what this maculae does is it responds to the pull of gravity and reports changes in head position by the movement of these cells here, these hair-like cells and so forth. And we'll talk more of that when we get to the physiology. So again, as we were saying, the vestibule is an egg-shaped cavity in the bony labyrinth. Contains two membranous sacs. The saccule continues with the cochlear duct. The utricle continues with the semicircular canals. And these sacs house equilibrium receptors known as the macula, and they respond to changes in position of the head. Okay, we go next to the semicircular canals. Okay, here are the semicircular canals. They are oriented at right angles to one another, the anterior, lateral, and posterior. And in those is the semicircular duct. The canal is the cut in the bone, but the duct is within there. Okay? And what the duct is that at the end of each of these, as you can see, is a swelling called the ampulla. Okay? The ampulla. And within there, you see these hair cells. Within there, you see the crista ampullaris, which contains these hair cells in the cupula. And what happens is that it responds to rotational head motion. So rotational motion is what does this. Let's look here at this picture. See how these cupula and the hair cells, they bend. The fluid, which you should know would be the endolymph, bends depending on the rotation. So this gives an indication of angular rotation. Angular rotation. That's the semicircular canals. The semicircular canals. And remember that the vestibule responded to pull of gravity and reported changes in head position. Okay.